Today my guest is Michael Kimsal. Michael, how you doing?
Doing good, thank you.
Hey, Michael is the editor and founder of JS Mag, a magazine that focuses on what?
JavaScript professionals, professional JavaScript development.
Okay, and I've read a couple of copies of this magazine. In fact, I might even steal this one. Can I have this one?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It's yours.
Starting out well.
That's my last one, that's yours.
The JavaScript is a huge category we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
There's coding, there's frameworks, there's patterns.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are just starting to pay attention to JavaScript just in the last couple of years, even though it's been around a long time.
Yes. That is the interesting thing about JavaScript. It essentially had a rebirth probably in the past 3 or 4 years as something that is recognized as a language and a skill in its own right.
Right. So I'm going to let you know a secret. I've tried JavaScript in the past,
Okay.
and I've found it frightening. It's
Really?
hard. I think it's hard. Just writing JavaScript, there's issues with the language. There's issues with, I'm usually writing it in a browser, so there's issues with the DOM. There's issues with making it work in different browsers. Am I right to be kind of frightened by this language?
I'll let you in on the secret. I'm scared of it too, a bit.
Okay.
My first experience with JavaScript was back in probably 97 or so. First started doing in-browser JavaScript, and it was fun and exciting. And then as you started to get into the biggest issue, which stops a lot of people, is cross-browser stuff. This works on Netscape 3, I'm dating myself, but it doesn't work on IE3. It doesn't work the same. And that, people fought that, tried to work around that, and it was painful. There was a long period of time where it was painful, and I think a lot of people were right to be dissatisfied at the time with what was available.
And I've heard this argument that it's not JavaScript that's flawed, it's the DOM that's flawed.
It's the browser's implementation.
But to me that doesn't
DOM.
matter. It's
Exactly.
hard, it's hard.
Exactly. And one of the, what I think has been one of the fundamental issues that has been problematic with JavaScript being adopted earlier is that the JavaScript engine, for the 99% of people, the JavaScript engine is tied to your browser. And if you want a new version of the JavaScript engine, you have to get a new browser. And that ultimate tying, as nice as it is for the developers and say, this works with this version, it's caused a lot of problems. Whereas with other plugins, you can upgrade your version of Flash. I can get the new version of Flash for the same browser, but I can't do it on my JavaScript engine yet. So that, for a long time, historically, that really held back experimentation in the core JavaScript engines, which would make things, and ultimately are making things easier for people these days.
All right, so is there any hope for me?
There's a lot of hope, and if I rambled there a little bit, I apologize. It's something I tend to use big words sometimes.
Don't apologize for talking too much about the show. The more you talk, the less I have to talk.
I think there is a lot of hope, and the hope came about. I'm trying to think of the dates here. I think there was a generation of hope that started about 4 years ago, early #06. I first came across a framework, an actual library for JavaScript that runs in the browser called YUI from Yahoo.
Oh yeah.
And around the same time, and I might probably get my dates wrong a little bit, but jQuery was another library that kind of hit the scene. And between these two libraries, we had ways programmatically to abstract away all these differences. Well, IE6 does it this way, IE5 does it this way, Netscape 3 works this way, Opera does this. These frameworks came along and abstracted a lot of that and said, you just need to call this thing. We'll handle the guts underneath, and brought the same elegance that we had in the Java API, as monstrous as it is to some people. It is very, once you get in, it's understandable. The .NET framework, as vast as that is, it's understandable. There's a coherence to it, and that is what the jQuery and YUI and some of these other frameworks that are popular now, EXT, which is now Sencha, and Prototype, Dojo. They brought this abstraction, this concept of abstraction, and are now competing with adding extra functionality and features on top of those abstractions. But it's made this accessible to a whole generation of people that I think the generation before, or 5 years before that, we're just giving up on JavaScript. This is too painful. This is too much. I'll use ActiveX. I'll use Flash. I'll use Java applets to get that browser interactivity.
Yeah, now we have Silverlight as well. So
And Silverlight and JavaFX as well too.
Yeah. So then that's what jQuery doesn't scare me. jQuery just makes sense to me in a way that JavaScript does not. So would this be a recommendation for people that are like me, that are sort of intimidated by JavaScript, to don't tackle JavaScript, but instead choose one of these frameworks? Or what is your recommendation?
It depends on what your goal is, but I think and if you're for people that are, it's kind of like me, a jack of all trade programmer, someone, I do some front end, I do some back end, I do whatever. Yeah, I think it makes sense to pick a framework and work with that to start with. And as much as I like jQuery, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that somebody that's going to be with it for a long time. I would recommend looking at maybe the top 4 or 5, the YUI's jQuery, EXT, Dojo, maybe Prototype or MooTools, that sort of group there. Look at those, because while most of them provide a lot of the same functionality, they do it a little bit differently. And the APIs are a little different. The focus in some cases is a little different. So what you'll find is you might be productive with jQuery, you might be a little bit more productive with Dojo, it might click with you a little bit better in your brain. But learning one of the frameworks is going to give you a big leg up on being productive. If at some point you need to switch to another framework, I've got a good friend who was extremely talented in jQuery for a long time. She's very well known in jQuery. Rebecca Murphy, fantastic front-end person. She had gone probably about as far as she thought she'd go with jQuery for a while, took everything she knew and started working with Dojo. And while it was a learning curve, it wasn't as much of a learning curve as starting from scratch.
Right. And so the gaps that she found in jQuery were filled in by Dojo. So
yeah.
I imagine it's said vice versa is true.
Yeah, they were. And I'm not talented enough to explain all the kind of nuances of what those were. The interesting thing was some of the things that she was looking for in jQuery were in Dojo, and because of the rapid nature of the whole JavaScript community and the framework, most of those things she found missing were in the next version of jQuery about less than a year later, or about a year later.
Oh, okay.
So things that jQuery does, because all these frameworks are very open source, a lot of the things
she wanted, others people wanted as well, and some of them actually went out.
Exactly, and there's a lot of sharing. The jQuery community built a new selector engine. That's the code that actually lets you say, grab me this stuff from the DOM, grab this from the DOM, and they package that up separately, called it Sizzle. And Sizzle is very fast, and that is something that they say, you can use the Sizzle core of our jQuery system, and you can use it in other things. So other libraries are now adopting Sizzle as well, too. So yeah, there is this sharing of things going on, which it happens in the Java community, it happens in .NET, things, people do stuff. It happens much, much faster in the JavaScript community.
Really? So now you're building front-end applications, you just said. Are you, and you're putting a lot of JavaScript in those, or tell me your approach.
Well,
you're more experienced than I am, though, so you're not the...
I'll tell you a recent project that I had, and I'd like more of my projects to go like this. In some cases, I can't, but I learned a lot from doing this. I worked actually with Rebecca on a kind of a quick prototype project, but I did all the back-end work. I did all the web server stuff, and she did all the front-end stuff. And all we talked about was, when I do this, I'm going to pass you this JSON string, and this is the JSON string I want back. We knew roughly what we wanted it to do, but she said, here's what I want, and here's what I'm expecting back. She defined that, and it was very easy to write code. I didn't have to worry about how's it going to look or how's this going to happen. She handled all the front-end layout with Dojo. So all I was doing was taking JSON strings, processing, and sending JSON back. That was very liberating.
You were doing that in JavaScript or in server-side?
I was doing that server-side PHP, and she was doing all the browser work in Dojo.
Okay.
Now, it was great to work with somebody like that because she knew what she was doing and she was very good at that. I learned a lot from that, and based on the timeline of my next project, I might take that approach, even if I do it myself, but coming up with this very strong separation. So rather than generating out HTML and generating out maybe inline JavaScript, just going with an SOA or services-based approach, where the web server is just providing service and data, and the front end is all client-side JavaScript. That's what I'd like to do. The practicalities may be, if the next project is very, very tight, I may fall back to my old ways. But I've seen, to me, that was a much stronger way of doing it. It made me think about the project differently.
Okay. In that case, we were actually running the server-side code. What about when you're writing the client-side code? Are you choosing a framework? Or
when I'm writing the client-side code, I am alternately using YUI, or depends on what I'm doing. If I'm needing a lot of stuff, I'm using YUI, partially because some of the server-side frameworks that I use already have integration with YUI, so I'm using those as an extension. Yeah. For smaller projects where I just need a little bit of interactivity, I fall back to jQuery, and I don't mean that as a that's not a jQuery is only good for small stuff. Some people have leveled that charge, and I don't think so. I've seen massive things done with jQuery. Just for me, it's very convenient to do I need to do an on-click here, and I need to make this happen. I can do that in jQuery in 5 minutes.
Do you ever fall back to writing just raw JavaScript without a framework?
Not much anymore. Probably the past 3 or 4 years, I've taken to doing the majority of stuff because the majority of stuff I would be doing would be using I'm still doing DOM manipulation somehow, so I'm using usually either YUI or jQuery for that. Inside of that, I still write some of my own custom JavaScript, just logic to do this. But I'm finding that there are, whether it's plugins for jQuery or there's some other libraries out there that do very custom things, I'm finding it's some way more liberating right now to just find these pieces and glue them together when I can.
On the server side, there's a lot of talk right now that we've been sort of spoiled by these abstractions. So, for example, ASP.NET Web Forms abstracts away a lot of the HTML and a lot of the HTTP, and as a result, we've got a lot of people working in building web applications that really don't understand CSS, HTML, HTTP, the fundamental cores. Is there a danger of that happening in the JavaScript world? If I'm just working with a framework like Dojo or jQuery, am I not going to understand JavaScript? I mean, is it worthwhile for me to understand JavaScript?
That's an awesome question, and I don't think there's a right answer. I think there's a value in understanding JavaScript, in understanding how the language works itself. It can help you understand some of the things that are possible with frameworks, or why some frameworks are written certain ways to get around limitations of the language. The abstractions that the majority of these frameworks provide are important because what they're abstracting over is major differences between how Opera, IE, Chrome, Safari, different versions of IE and all that, how they operate. So I look at that abstraction as a practical necessity for people who want to be productive. The abstractions, we see this in the PHP world and in the Ruby world as well, people saying, well, you're just using a framework, you don't understand the low-level stuff. I'm not sure that the abstractions are as necessary. An HTTP post coming in to a server looks the same whether you're using ASP or PHP or Java or whatever. It's the same data coming in. So I think that there's more of a benefit of learning that underlying protocol and understanding what's going on in your server than there is trying to understand the myriad differences on browsers.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing you say is it's important, but not as important as in the server side, and that the gains in productivity outweigh the loss of knowledge of the intimate details of raw JavaScript. Is that a fair statement?
And it is, and I think that probably holds for most people, especially as the jack of all trades. I've done the raw JavaScript and trying to get it to work in multiple browsers, which generally what you have to do, that's a pain. For people that want to focus and just be front-end engineers, which is, I think, thankfully, it's becoming a recognized discipline in its own right. You've got database people, they've had their own stuff for a long time, and the JavaScript was just add some on-clicks or something. Front-end engineering in browsers is becoming its own thing. For people that want to focus just on that, I think that they do need a deeper understanding of the JavaScript language itself.
Okay. There is a lot of buzz about JavaScript now. In fact, I run a user group up in Michigan, and probably by the time this show airs, we'll already had our July meeting. But we're doing, Len Smith is doing a talk on test-driven development in JavaScript, which is two phrases that people don't usually think about together. Think about people are like test-driven development, they like JavaScript, they don't bring them together. He's also providing some solid principles in JavaScript. So this sort of elevates JavaScript to a first-class language, which it wasn't really thought of that way before.
No, it wasn't. We actually had, I'm not sure if we have one in this one, in the earlier sampler issue JS Mag, we had an issue on an article on test-driven development, specifically using the YUI test harness. And there's some other frameworks that have test-driven things, bringing that discipline that people know and love, people love it, from the server side to the client side has been a big, I think it's been a big move forward for helping legitimize the work that people do on the front end.
All right. Anything else to add?
JavaScript on the server is becoming important as well, or it's becoming interesting, I should say. It's not terribly important on too many people's radar, but there are people that like the fact that I understand this language in the browser and I can use the exact same language and syntax on the server. And that's becoming a movement in and of itself. Things like Rhino as a server-side JavaScript engine, Node.js is becoming a fairly popular JavaScript framework for server-side development. So that's something for JavaScript people to at least keep their eye on. If you're comfortable with it, you can use your front-end skills and start working on the server side as well.
Interesting. Before we run out of time, I know you had a lot of projects you're working on right now. We mentioned the magazine. How do people they want us to try this magazine?
Yes, jsmag.com.
jsmag.com, okay. And you have a podcast?
I podcast on webdevradio.com, which is an audio podcast, typically interviews with people much smarter than myself.
That's my plan too.
Well, I'm not sure if you got this one or not, but
We'll let the audience decide.
yes. I just got done with a talk here at Codestock on Twilio, which is an hosted IVR. It's not really hosted. I don't know how to describe it. A phone service in the sky, if you will. So I can call a number and have that number attached to my server, and I can send XML back and forth, and it reads it out, and it does a lot of cool stuff.
Sounds like a really good show.
Yeah, Twilio is a nice platform. There's some competing platforms. Tropo's another one. It's more JSON based rather than XML, but there's a lot of activity heating up in that market, and that's commoditizing things. I did a quick demo and I showed it to my brother, and I said, 10 years ago that probably would have cost $20,000 to do that, and it would have taken months of hardware setup, and this was 10 minutes of clicking in a browser. That's all it was. So just looking at the change of pace there in JavaScript and really the change of pace technologies, I'm starting to feel like an old guy because it's hard to keep up sometimes, but I do enjoy it.
And you have a blog too, right?
I have a blog, michaelkimsal.com. That's just me. If you go there, you find my blog, and that's what I do.
Outstanding. Michael, thanks a lot. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Dave. A haiku. At technology conferences, you can meet and make some great new friends.